Nearly 1/2 of the world's population, 3 billion people, live on less than $2.50 a day. $2.50, what could that buy us? A candy bar? To be honest, that wouldn't even cover my weekly coffee order. I've been on 2 mission trips to the Dominican Republic where I saw what $2.50 a day looks like. Children walking barefoot, torn clothes, and pervasive hunger. In the villages, there's no running water, sewage systems, or electricity. Now, my job on this trip was to visit schools and test children for eyesight and provide them with glasses. I will never forget the moment that a severely nearsighted 3rd grade girl was tested with 2500 vision. I could relate, that's my prescription. And it's also legally blind without correction. She was in 3rd grade, and she had never seen the world with detail. And when I handed her those glasses, her expression changed from one of shyness and concern to one of absolute joy. This inspired me, coming home, to start a campaign at my school to collect eyeglasses in partnership with Lions Club. This year, we have collected over 100 pairs of glasses and raised over $500 in donation. And these glasses are sent to the Lions Club Eyeglass Recycling Center, where they are repurposed to be used for children who need them. There's a word to describe this $2.50 a day lifestyle that I've described to you: poverty. Coming home, I couldn't unsee poverty. And here's the interesting thing: it began to show up everywhere, at my dance studio, at my school, even walking down the street. So I asked myself, does this problem really exist? Is extreme poverty really a problem in our world's most developed country? Well, according to the United States Census Bureau, in 2018, 38.1 million Americans were living in poverty. So then I asked myself, well, what is the main cause of this global issue? And there's a lot of them. Inadequate access to food and clean water, lack of employment, familial relationships, addiction, abuse, mental health problems. Poverty is a vicious cycle, which is why it's especially difficult for children and youth to break out of it without help. And while there's no easy fix, there are some organizations that are doing some amazing things. I am an advocate for children of the nations. And over the past 2 years since getting involved, I have bake sailed, car washed, spoken at elementary schools, hosted a school supplies drive with this organization. And I wanted to share a story about an elementary school visit. Now, at the beginning of every classroom I would go to, I would start with asking, can anyone raise their hand and tell me what poverty is? And this seems like a pretty simple question, but I can tell you from kindergarten to 6th grade, I got some pretty interesting responses. So in this classroom of 5th graders, this boy shot his hand up, and he said, I know what poverty is. Poverty is when you live on the street because you've done so many bad things in your life. Well, not exactly. But then we had a conversation, and I left a classroom full of students who not only cared, but wanted to take action on this issue. And a week later, I was invited back to this classroom, and they wanted to do a fundraiser. So on their own, they planned it out, and they decided to work with the Feeding Children initiative, where 1 quarter is 1 meal for a child in need. And all on their own, they raised enough money to feed 3,000 children for one day. It was pretty cool. So another story. This is Dr. Solomon, a doctor that came with us to the schools in the Dominican Republic to help us provide eye care and also to help with the language barrier. And on our bus rides to the villages, Saul shared his story with me. Solomon grew up in a very impoverished area in the Dominican Republic. And because of Children of the Nations and a lot of hard work on his end, he was able to pursue an undergraduate and ultimately a medical degree. And then he told me about his work with malaria. Now, malaria was something I'd heard of. I knew it was a big, scary disease, but I knew very little about it. And what Saul told me is that malaria is a largely preventable disease, yet it kills about 1 million people every year. So in 2018, Saul began visiting villages, his own village included, to talk about malaria, the prevention, and the risks. He teaches people that because standing water is a mosquito breeding ground, to not leave sinks or containers full of water. And because mosquitoes tend to feed at night, he provides them with nets from Children of the Nations to wear in the evenings. Just imagine something as simple as educating people to dump out water and wear a net could prevent a deadly disease. This is my mother. She's an ophthalmologist, and she also serves in the Dominican Republic. My mother has never experienced extreme poverty the way that Dr. Solomon had. So what separates my mom and Dr. Solomon from people who could care less or don't feel the need to take action on this issue? Well, Dr. Solomon felt compelled to help because he had experienced poverty firsthand. My mom is one of the most empathetic people I know. And she feels compelled to help because she feels compassion towards their way of life, and she understands that this is a massive problem. So the answer to that question comes down to this. People will care if they understand the realness and severity of an issue, which is why we need to talk about it. Poverty, food prices, and hunger are inextricably connected. There are 795 million people in the world who do not get the nutrition they need every day to lead a healthy and active life. And not everyone who experiences poverty experiences chronic hunger, but everyone that experiences this type of hunger experiences poverty. In America, in the Dominican Republic, I saw hunger. But I also saw what organizations like Children of the Nations are doing about it. They provide students and families with wholesome and nutritious meals every single day. And in America, we don't see poverty the same way. It's not visible to us, but it's there. 22 million American students rely on the free and reduced lunch programs at their school to eat every day. And did you know that in KidSAP, 39,657 students rely on this program to eat lunch every day. So it's there. There are programs like food banks and free and reduced lunch that are so helpful. But we need to advocate and be aware of this issue if we want these organizations to continue to have the funding and support that they need to feed our hungry. I'm in the student government at my school, and this year we decided to host a food drive. It seemed as simple as putting up posters, some bins, and contacting our local food bank. But something that was unsettling was how hard it was to get students to donate. They didn't want to drag heavy bags to school, didn't want to go through their cupboards looking for cans, or didn't want to stop at the store. So it was 2 days before the food drive end date, and we had an embarrassingly small amount of food. So after a brainstorming session, a group of us decided to visit classrooms to simply inform them and encourage students to donate because their donations could really help families in our community. And suddenly on those last 2 days, the donations came pouring in. Now, was this in part because of high schoolers' remarkable talent to procrastinate? Well, maybe. But we realized that when we brought attention to poverty and hunger existing in our community, students felt compelled to make a difference. Poverty is the greatest contributor to human trafficking, which includes but is not limited to sexual and labor slavery. It is the second most profitable industry in the world under narcotics, with annual yearly earnings of $35 to $37 billion and 1 million people trafficked every year. Victims of human trafficking almost always come from poor backgrounds, desperate for employment to support themselves and their families, and because they are rarely aware of the nature of this type of work, they often become unpaid slaves and unable to escape. I first learned about what human trafficking was when I was in the 8th grade. An organization called Rescue Freedom visited my church. I was upset, confused, and angry that girls my age and younger were being sold for their bodies because their families could not support themselves on their own. Sexual trafficking, that is a big subject. What on earth is a 17-year-old girl in a pantsuit going to do about this one? Well, I'll tell you. My lovely friends and I, every year since the 8th grade, get together to bake goodies to sell at our church. And in total, we've raised over $3,000 towards this organization. Just imagine something as simple as baking cookies with your friends in your pajamas could rescue women from sexual slavery. By getting involved with organizations like Children of the Nations and Rescue Freedom, we can all make a difference. Now, despite everything I just told you, we all know poverty is a problem. We've known since we were very young. Don't waste your food. There's children starving in Africa. Don't walk too close to those people on the street. They're probably on drugs. You have to go to college so you don't end up like that sign twirler over there. Mom, that one was for you. So, we know poverty is a global problem. And we think to ourselves, the only way we could possibly solve such a big issue is with immense amount of funding and supplies. But what if I told you we're telling the story wrong? Poverty is a global problem, and it goes beyond social, political, and economic issues, which is why our solutions need to go beyond as well. Now, I certainly don't have the answer, but I am confident that big projects and lots of money are not the only way to solve this problem. So I've come up with 2 things to give you today that everyone, no matter what age, living situation, or source of income can do to help eradicate global poverty. And they're so simple. Acknowledge it and talk about it. When we acknowledge that a problem exists, it changes our decisions and actions. So when we recognize that poverty exists in impoverished countries, but it also exists in our own country, community, and even neighborhood, we begin to foster a greater sense of understanding and feel the responsibility to help eradicate it. So I want you to think about this for just a second. Have you ever solved a problem or even took steps towards solving one without truly acknowledging that it was one? Yes, we are all busy with school and work and being a parent, but this widespread problem persists. We need to talk about it, and it needs to happen now. In order to be effective leaders in our communities, whether it's Bremerton, Bainbridge, Seattle, even Seebeck, we need to be advocates for this issue. I'm here to tell you that poverty does not always have to exist, but we're telling the story wrong. Poverty isn't an unsolvable task. It's not just in Haiti and Africa. It's not just in the slums of New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, or Seattle. Poverty is real, and it is all around us. But the most important thing is that there's no magic $1 million idea to solving it. At least we haven't come up with it yet. But by discussing, advocating, and being aware of this issue, I can assure you that together we will bring the number of people living in poverty down. I ask and encourage you to think of ways that we can solve this problem creatively, whether it's researching crops to grow in various climates to be more accessible for all, bringing healthcare to impoverished countries, feeding children at our schools in America, supporting and creating programs with our local food banks. In this room alone, there is great knowledge and skill to do these things and more. We might have gotten the story wrong, but it is never too late for change. Are you ready? Let's go. Thank you.